Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Comox Valley Regional District Regular Board Meeting of April 12th to order. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And along with our territorial acknowledgement, we have been learning about the United Nations rights of Indigenous peoples, and there was 46 articles, and we have completed the 46 articles. And so we decided to move on to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. So we'll help inform the board and inform the public of the contents of that as we move forward through our regular board meetings. So the first one is call to action 1. It has to do with child welfare. We call upon the federal, provincial, territorial, and Aboriginal governments to commit to reducing the number of Aboriginal children in care by 1, monitoring and assessing neglect investigations, 2, providing adequate resources to enable Aboriginal communities and child welfare organizations to keep Aboriginal families together where it is safe to do so, and to keep children in culturally appropriate environments, regardless of where they reside. 3, ensuring that social workers and others who conduct child welfare investigations are properly educated and trained about the history and impacts of residential schools. 4, ensuring that social workers and others who conduct child welfare investigations are properly educated and trained about the potential for Aboriginal communities and families to provide more appropriate solutions to family healing. And 5, requiring that all child welfare decision makers consider the impact of residential school experience on children and their caregivers. So with that, we move to our in-camera recommendation. Cole Hamilton and Hillian, thank you. And so we'll be moving in camera following the regular meeting due to section 91A, C, E, G, K, and 92B. And we have quite the volume of references today because the community charter reflects the board's consideration of the annual release of in-camera information in accordance with the release of closed meeting minute policy P51. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. So we get to see adoption of minutes from March 29th. Panier and Arbor, thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And we're on to business arising from minutes. We have the Comox Valley Regional District appointments for the Food Hub Stewardship Group.
Good.
Grieve and Arbor, thank you. Any further discussion about the appointments? All right, and Director Grieve.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And this may be a reoccurring theme at this meeting today. I mean, what's a meeting without a little bit of historical context by Uncle Eddie? But I think that what is important is that our system relies a lot on volunteerism. We're seeing that waning. I don't think the new generation is quite as prone to volunteer. They're obviously very busy in their lives. But, you know, being that I'm on the July 1st committee and others, we had a meeting yesterday and there was 4 members when there would normally be about 24 at this time. So, and they're all, you know, getting up there in age. So we rely so much on our volunteers to sit on these boards and committees and societies. We see waning membership in the service clubs. I think the Kinsmen are able to do a pancake breakfast this year, but I think even Comox Rotary are pulling back on the Ducky 500, and the Lions can't even do the beer garden. So when we go out for these requests for the like this steering group, we have a lot of the same people that you see everywhere. I mean, I'm looking at this list here. and God bless them. I mean, they're stepping up. But like Jerry, McKintock, he was past president of the Comox Valley Farmers Institute. We've got members from all kinds of groups, and I can see that many of these names, they're already volunteering in about 4 or 5 other things: Lush Valley Food Council, CVEX, both Farmers Institutes, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm just throwing this out there because I think that we're seeing a diminishing pool of talent out there. And, as I said, it's great we've had these people step up, but it took, I think, 2 calls to get 8 people, a possible 11 to step up. So I don't know what the future holds, but we may have to revisit our model, because if we just rely on the same people time and time again, and you're going to burn them out. It's just going to happen unless we can get some new blood to come up. So I think we have a blue ribbon team here. It's great. There are a few gaps. I think we need that fundraiser guy out there. But and I'm going to bring this up a little later in another item too. But I just think that somehow we got to revitalize the citizens to realize that the community is only what they put in. We only get back what we put in. So, we've got a good group here, and I'm totally in favor of it. But going forward, we may have to come up with a slightly different model, because we absolutely rely on these people for our community input. So we're getting the same faces, putting the same community input all the time. It can get to a point where you're not really getting the broad picture. So that's it. I'll leave it at that. But certainly, congratulations to all the people step forward. As I say, it's a great bunch. So we'll go for this.
Thank you. Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. Just a minor point of order. Do we actually require a motion when we're simply rising and reporting on a resolution that has in fact been passed?
We're just on receipt. Yeah.
Do we need that, even that?
We don't. We've already moved and seconded. So yeah, thank you. And yeah, thank you, Director Gree, for pointing out the importance of our volunteers to what we do. And we are aware that there is a lot of burnout that's happening. And so it's an extra special thanks to these people for putting their names forward for this group. Okay, so any further discussion? We're on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And now we're on to reports. And our first report is the Transit Future Action Plan update. Cole Hamilton and Grant, thank you. And I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And online is Mike Zabarski, along with representatives from BC Transit. I'll ask Mike to introduce this topic and our guests to discuss to you this Transit Action Future Plan and answer your questions.
Yes, thanks, Russell. Through the chair to the board. Long-awaited return of the Transit Future Action Plan. You may recall we started this just before the pandemic kicked in and had to take a break, unfortunately, but we're back at it. We have been for a few months working behind the scenes, and we're just going to give you an update today on where things are at before we go to public engagement. With that, I'll pass it on to BC Transit. We have Myrna Moore here to kind of support things, and Melissa Coates, the transit planner, who will be delivering the presentation, and will all be available for questions after. Melissa, take it away.
Thanks, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone.
If you're having trouble sharing, we do have the presentation here, I believe we can put on.
Okay, I'm just giving it a try here. Let's see if this works.
There we go.
There it is. Excellent. Okay, yeah, so as Mike alluded to, we're just here to give an update on the Transit Future Action Plan to date, and kind of the things that we've done so far and what's coming up in terms of the plan process. So the purpose of the Transit Future Action Plan, it really looks to update the 2014 Transit Future Plan. So this plan was a longer term 25-year plus plan. And then from there, what we're doing is we're looking at the priorities within the Transit Future Plan, and we're looking to update them in the Transit Future Action Plan and really focusing on the next 1 to 5 years and the improvements that we can make with some additional priorities identified for the longer term. This plan will ensure alignment with regional mobility priorities that are outlined in the mobility primer. So this includes reducing GHG emissions, health and well-being, equity and inclusion, as well as fiscal responsibility. And as well, this plan will look to align with goals and objectives that are contained within local community plans. The overall vision for the Transit Future Action Plan, so it really focuses on things like the integration of transit with active modes of transportation, as well as transit supportive land use policies within the community, and then prioritizing equity groups within the community to promote an equitable transit system. And I just wanted to briefly touch on mode share. So a mode share target was originally included in the 2014 Transit Future Plan. And this target was a 3% mode share by the year 2038. In this Transit Future Action Plan, we'll de-emphasize this a bit, and we're really going to be more focusing on the regional priorities and make sure we're capturing everything. But in terms of continuing to work to that mode share of 3% and increase ridership in the system, the things that we're going to continue to think about to work towards, making transit attractive, so that's continuing to invest in the transit system and kind of the calculation to work towards that 3% mode share is the average of investing about 2,500 hours per year into the transit system. Continuing with transit supportive development and land use policies within the communities. And then as well as things that hold people accountable and encourage people to change their behavior. So these are things like paying for parking and pedestrian and cycling connectivity and things like that will help support that change. And so just an overview of the plan timeline itself. So this plan, as Mike said, we originally kicked this off in 2020, and now we've restarted it as of the beginning of this year. So we did stakeholder workshops at the beginning of 2020 before the pandemic. So we had that information from the stakeholders. We did some engagement with them. So we've reviewed the community context, the existing transit system, and we've used all this information to develop some options, some service proposals that we're taking out to public engagement. So as of right now, we're just 2 days prior to going live with our public engagement. So that'll go live on Thursday, and that'll be open for about a month. This is an online engagement process that I'll speak to a little bit more later. And then if we're looking to wrap this plan up itself at sometime in the summer, and then at that point, we can look to integrate the service proposals into service planning. So some of the priorities that we're carrying forward from the 2014 plan are outlined here. So we've completed most of the short-term service improvements from the original 2014 plan. So just a couple of service level improvements, as well as a restructure identified for the West Courtney area. Some medium-term service improvements are carrying forward, evaluating the effectiveness of the by request service that's offered, continuing to improve service levels on routes 10 and route 12. And we just actually added service to both of those routes in our March service change. Introducing interregional service to Nanaimo and investigating splitting the route 11 into 2 routes. Some longer things we're carrying forward as well. is eventually looking at having the route to Cumberland operate as an extension of the frequent transit network, which is Route 1. Exploring the implementation of a community bus service on Hornby and Denman Islands, looking at this as a BC Transit operated service, and then continuing to expand the interregional service between the Comox Valley and Nanaimo once it's implemented. Some of the new priorities that emerged that will be included in this plan. So some of the things that we've identified here, working with school district 71 to look at our services and look at how we can align with school bell times, things like that. So continuing to work with them on that. Improving service to the Comox Valley Farmers Market, the Sports Center, McPhee Avenue, 19 Wing Comox, and Comox First Nation. So the key topics we're going to be engaging on is service to the Regional District of Nanaimo and subsequently the South Island. Some proposed routing changes in West Courtney, and I'll give you a preview of that coming up. Just seeking some feedback on specific routes. So Route 11, Little River, this is the route that services the ferry and the airport, as well as the routes that offer by request service. We'll also be looking to identify priorities for the new Route 15. So this route was implemented in March with our service change, and it goes between Comox Mall and the Aquatic Center via back road, primarily to service Comox First Nation, Hornby and Denman Island service, as well as overall priorities. So to dive in a little bit more to the West Courtney service proposal, this is what service in West Courtney looks like today. It's serviced by 2 different routes, and you can see the Route 7 there. There's a dotted line, so this means that the Route 7 at different times of day does different things, and this can be a little bit confusing. So what we're looking to do with these 2 routes is to make it into 3 different routes to make it and expand the area that we're covering, as well as make it a little bit more clear for our customers. So having the Route 7 extend out to Powerhouse, having the new Route 9, which would service the Arden area, and then streamlining the Route 8 a bit, and then having those routes 8 to 9 extend down to Anfield Center. As well as another proposal we have to improve service to the West Courtney area is to realign the current Route 5. So this Route 5 also has a dotted line, which again means it does different things at different times of day. So looking to provide some consistent routing between Anfield Center and the Sports Center. And what we're looking to do with this route is provide service along McPhee Avenue, which is a priority that we've heard through our key stakeholder engagement, and looking to address it by providing service with this route. So the next steps for this plan, as I mentioned, so we're going live with our public engagement on Thursday. So this will be primarily online only at the link shown there. And then we'll also have paper versions of our survey that will be available at the CVRD office, the Aquatic Center, and the Sports Center. Following this extensive engagement process for a month, we'll then summarize what we heard and prioritize the service improvements based on what we heard from the public. We'll then review what we heard and where we're going with the final plan with the TMAC and the municipal staff. And then at that point, we'll develop the final Transit Future Action Plan and present it to the board, and looking to have that in summer 2022 this year. So coming up very quickly. That concludes the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So we'll go to the board. Are there any questions Director Arbor.
Thanks. I'm so, I love this plan and the, what's being presented and for the update. Yeah, there's some strategic pieces in there, like it's the first time I hear that, but to have the number one reach into Cumberland, there's already a lot of buses heading to Cumberland, which is good, but I think to align it with number one and not to have to do transfers and all that, that's long-term really good. It does lead me to think as to whether so I'll have to think more on that. Maybe I'll submit to the engagement process, but we're doing a lot of work around the infill center and the new infrastructure that we want to put there. But now that you're mentioning number one, I'm like, maybe the interchange should be at Canadian Tire and avoid that little loopity-loop around Enfield and then just go straight up to Cumberland with number one. Have an exchange there. But that's a fleeting thought I just had 10 seconds ago. So, you know, it's great to see the connection to the potential exploring connection to Nanaimo. And then I like that you have in the long term to even look for enhancement down the line. Obviously, this goes hand in hand with the Camel River connection, which is pretty good. They have a lot of buses coming down this way. We don't have as many buses. I think the only thing that is not in this plan that I think we should consider, and it's been raised before, even by Councillor Dr. Frisch at the time, is our connection to the airport is still pretty poor. You know, if you look at, we connect well into Comox, but I don't know a lot of people that rely on our transit system to go and catch their plane, whereas in a lot of places, you see better connectivity. So maybe that'll be for the long term. I don't know. But everything you put in, I think it's great for the public. You should receive a lot of good feedback and still focusing on a high density corridor, but adding some things that I think will really help regional connectivity. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Honeyr, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Melissa. Great plan. I'm going to echo Director Arbor's comment. It looks like staff were really able to tease out a lot of the directions that this board gave and the presentations that came. You know, I note that you've got some great maps for the updates on route changes. I'm just wondering, you know, under the new priorities, how will you engage the public on these priorities? Is it just going to be like a, you know, tick the box of what priority you like, or do you have an idea of how that's going, what that's going to look like in the survey?
Yeah, thanks for that, Kristen. So through the chair, yeah, so we do have all of our materials finalized for our public engagement, so I can definitely speak to that. So we have some specific proposals that we're getting direct feedback on. So that'll be things like the West Courtney service that I showed there, as well as we're getting some general feedback on specific routes, on things that folks might like to see for improvements, to kind of help us decide what we might look to do there. And then as well, we'll have kind of an overall priority list that folks can look to vote on. So it'll be kind of one near the end of the survey, one large list, and kind of all the improvements that we're looking at doing in the Comox Valley Transit System. And then people can indicate whether that's a high priority, a medium priority, or a low priority for them. And we can use that information to make the final priority list that goes into the plan.
Okay, thanks. That sort of answered that question, but it also just sort of jogged another question. Do you track where these responses are coming from? Like what geographical area? I'm interested, like, so if folks are from a specific area wanting to get to KFN or 19 Wing, do you have an idea how, like, where people are going to be needing that service from?
Yes, so there is a question that where we do ask people where they live. So we do get that indication from that.
Great, thank you.
Next we have Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'd echo many of the same comments. I think the interregional connectivity is fantastic to see, and there are a lot of good things in this report. I wanted to make a comment and ask a question about the routes in West Courtney. And I think that the observation is just that I think all of them are improvements, particularly Route 5. I think that routing it through the city rather than up Cliff and the connector is a great way of making sure that the kind of the north-south transit becomes a useful place for customers to be catching it. And the question with 7 and 8 being replaced with 7, 8, and 9. I'm just wondering, with 3 buses replacing 2 buses, does that mean that each of those 3, 7, 8, and 9 would have the same level of service? So that would be a sort of an increase of level of service of 1 full route in terms of scheduling.
Yeah, so I think with this plan, anything we look to do would be an improvement. And at this point, we wouldn't look to propose anything that would reduce service levels to anyone in those areas, and really more so looking at improving them, because that's something that we've heard.
Okay, so one would expect a similar frequency on 7, 8, and 9 of what is currently available on just the 2 routes in West Courtney, then it sounds like.
Correct,
okay,
yes.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Now we have Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. My question's along the lines of Director Hamir's around the public engagement piece. I'm wondering if we ever do sort of targeted public engagement. I think about we've had a lot of multi-residential development lately in Courtney and Comox in terms of the specific needs around those higher density areas. And, you know, it's sort of the cart before the horse thing, because we're trying to approve developments in the areas that have good transit, but there may be some gaps there that we're missing. So I guess I'm trying to get a sense of, along the lines of Director Hamir's, in terms of getting a sense of where people are from, which might be a fairly general area like West Courtney or even East Courtney, where we've got quite a few multi-residential developments going in. So I'm just curious how we can sort of fine tune that to get those more detailed needs assessment, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So as part of this engagement on our online survey area, we do have a place where folks can go in, and there's a mapping tool, and they can mark kind of like their primary origin and their primary destination day to day. And that helps give us really good insight into some travel patterns that we see, as well as the Comox Valley Mobility Primer also has some really useful information in there in terms of travel data, and we can utilize that as well within this plan.
Thank you. Director Killian.
Thanks, Chair. Good report. Nothing to add except that the Route 5 maps show the regional district office in its old location. We might want to upgrade those. Thanks.
Not moving back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm happy that with the new priorities, I think it's great to obviously align with the school district buses and to improve service to some of our active areas, the farmers market, sports center, and Comox First Nation. I have over the last couple of years been presented with presentations on on-demand transit, though, and it was suggested that BC Transit is kind of behind in that area of on-demand transit. And I'm wondering, we've kind of put off this discussion until we've heard from BC Transit through the Transit Future Action Plan. So I'd like to hear from you on what BC Transit's opinion is on on-demand transit, and are you leaving it more up to specific regions to come up with their own pilots? As an example, Powell River has their own on-demand pilot running that seems to be quite successful. But the ones that I've seen coming out of Ontario, they also have seem to be quite well received. And I feel like our 3% transit mode share over the next 15 years is not super ambitious, and that maybe we need to be looking at on-demand transit to increase that.
Yeah, so I will answer part of that and then I might get Myrna to jump in at a later point. So within the Transit Future Action Plan, the way that we're kind of exploring digital on demand is that we're looking at the current, what we call right now, the by request service, or we might call analog on demand. So you can phone ahead for the bus, but there's not the digital component of booking through an app. To see if they could be potential candidates for digital on demand. And so we're going to use the public engagement process to find that piece out and see what we hear back from the public. Myrna, I don't know if you want to add anything in terms of overall.
Oh, sure, thanks. So BC Transit has gone through the process of looking at both Central Okanagan and the city of Cranbrook as two systems within the province that have basically been a pilot for how digital on demand would work. We've shared that information with Mike Zabarski in terms of the outcome of those feasibility studies. There's definitely pro and con, and something that we would bring back to the committee. One area that is certainly being looked at for the pilot systems is if it's very low ridership routes. Those are the pieces that could potentially benefit from digital on demand type of service, but it is also needing to make sure that you're evaluating the cost of it compared to fixed route, fixed schedule service. The next step is we've been asking any of our local partners if they'd like to be on the list for consideration of digital on demand. And I know that Comox Valley has been added to that list. So we'll get back to staff and let Mike know how that basically works in terms of priorities. But we've certainly heard fairly loudly and clearly that Comox Valley is certainly interested in learning more about it. So we've got you on that list for sure.
Great. Thanks so much for that feedback. I'm glad to hear that we're on the list. And I do see another question, Director Grant.
There we go. Sorry, I got ahead of myself there and turned it off. But I brought this up a few years back where in Ontario, I think it's Innisfil does, and they use Uber. And they subsidize Uber rides. So you can phone up Uber, $4. I'm just looking at it right here. You can go to the rec center, all sorts of places for $4 a ride. It's on demand. And if you want to go as far as South Barrie, it's $6 a ride. And they just use Uber and you just phone them up and away you go. So, it seems like a simple one. I don't know what kind of website I'm looking at here, but it sounds like people quite like it. So just a thought.
Yeah, lots more to discuss in that arena of on demand. Thank you. And I think that's it for today. Thank you all for your presentations.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
And we're on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. We're on to item 2, the rezoning application update. Barbara and Hamir, thank you, and I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Alana Mullally, General Manager, Planning and Development, will outline the report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Russell. Through Madam Chair to the directors, we're bringing you this report to let you know that the applicant for rezoning file at the Saratoga Speedway, Mr. Rob Layton, has provided notice to staff of an intention to withdraw his rezoning application from the process. So we received this notice last week. You'll recall that you gave second reading to a proposed bylaw that would rezone the property in order to enable tourist commercial outdoor recreation and country residential 1 zoning on the property. And you also set a date for a public hearing, being April 27th. So tonight, we are asking you to please rescind the notice of that public hearing, essentially cancel the public hearing that we have scheduled for April 27th, and allow staff to come back to the Electoral Area Services Committee on May 9th to talk about options going forward. And specifically, we owe you some information. We owe you some information regarding the noise bylaw and the ability to regulate noise from auto racing. So that's one thing we'll speak to you about on the 9th. We also want to talk to you about some options. So this is an application, but you also have a bylaw now. And so what do we do with that bylaw? And then the third piece we want to talk to you about is in respect to a letter that we received from legal counsel representing a number of citizens in the community, respecting some concerns around the continuity of the non-conforming status of the use of the speedway use. So we'd like to come back in this report and talk to you about those 3 things, first to the committee and then ultimately to the board. So tonight, we're strictly asking for a cancellation and notice of cancellation of that public hearing on the 27th. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have some questions. Director Hamir.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Elena. And support, the recommendation to cancel the public hearing. I'm wondering if I can ask another thing to put on your list of for the update, because we have had a number of residents asking about a local area plan. So I'm hoping that staff, I'm obviously not assuming that, the plan's going to be coming forward, but what are the options there and where does that plan sit currently? And yeah, just for moving forward, where are we? Thanks.
Thank you. Director Grief.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, I am a bit disappointed that we're not going to public hearing because it's always really good to hear both sides. And there definitely are split. There's a split in the community right now and a real lack of information, accurate information, I think. But that being said, I think that, it fell on the applicant that this wasn't good for the community and it wasn't good for his family. I can tell you by answering the 120 emails I've answered over the last couple of months that there's some pretty wound up people out there right now. So maybe it's the best for all concerned. The only thing is they have to remember that as a legal non-conforming use, there is now really no impetus on the proponent to follow any of the things that he was being led to maybe make some concessions. There was talk around race-free Sundays and Mondays and Tuesdays and other things around, voluntary mitigation of sound. So I don't know what Rob's going to do in the future, but I do think that we did the right thing by offering him the full extent of process. I think everybody deserves that. And, that doesn't really matter if they fit in my personal view or not. If it's something that somebody brings forward, I think it's only proper that it goes right through the entire process. So again, I was looking forward to hearing from the entire community, but I'll hold all my other comments until after the meeting in May. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Griff. All right, I don't see any further lights and we're on receipt. All in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried and there's a recommendation. Okay, and the recommendation is a vote of the areas. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We're on to item 3, which is the 2022 recreation grant requests. Harbour and Grant, thank you. And I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. Doug DeMarzo, General Manager, Community Services, is online and will provide a summary of this report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you and good afternoon to the Chair and Directors. This is a report that outlines some requests for the recreation grant support as part of the Comox Valley Regional District granting process. In particular, the recreation grant services during budget allocation allotted $30,000 for special events contributions to support any one-time special events or games coming forward. Additionally, a further $20,000 was left unallocated to assist organizations with other types of supports as nonprofits regain their footings coming out of COVID-19. So as such, we're reviewing about $44,000 in grant requests here. Just quickly go through a couple highlights for each of them. The Comox Valley United Soccer Club had a request for $8,000. Might be worth noting in your appendix, it's listed as 6, but it was for 8 to host the Mini World Cup tournament. And staff recommend meeting a past commitment of $6,000 in 2020. The board supported $6,000 for the Mini World Cup, but unfortunately that was canceled. This is a rotating event around Vancouver Island, or Northern Vancouver Island. The Comox Valley Cycling Coalition is requesting $2,000. And this is primarily to support their updating of their cycling maps that they distribute for, well, locals and tourists alike. The Comox Valley Therapeutic Riding Society has requested $2,500 for operations of their equine-related therapies for children and adults in our community, mostly focused on people with complex needs. The Comox Valley Exhibition Association has a request of $10,000 to support the CVEX fall events that they have around an agriculturally focused festival on the Comox Valley Exhibition grounds. The Hornby Island Athletics Association is looking for $3,500 for fencing and repairs at Joe King Park. And finally, you'll recall a delegation came to the board, well, I guess came to the Rec Commission on February 15th from the Minor Hockey Association. And they were looking for granting money to complete club uniform changes to move away from the Chiefs branding. This was supported by the Comox First Nation as well. They requested anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 to support a projected budget of $70,000. And at this time, with the funding and allocations in the recreation grant, staff are recommending $20,000, as well as encouraging the club to continue its fundraising efforts and reach out to the Comox First Nation to explore opportunities for community dialogue throughout this process. So if staff recommendations are followed, that would leave you with approximately $6,000 of unallocated funds for anything else coming forward throughout the year. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Great, thank you, Doug. Dr. Arbor.
Thanks to staff for maintaining all these relationships and looking at how we can play a role in the delivery of sports and recreational services. I'm in favor of all these allocations. You're right that you have to cast your mind back a couple of years with the excitement around the Mini World Cup and people coming from all over Vancouver Island to the Comox Valley, and that's a good contribution. The minor association, a bit smaller amount than they asked, but I think it's appropriate. That by the sounds of it from their presentation, I think they'll be able to cover the rest. My only comment is I'd like to ask staff and our board if we, well, maybe that can be part of the discussion, but I'd like to propose another motion as part of this, which I've raised a couple of times already, which is that in 2023, the Recreation Commission will do a strategic planning next year after doing its first one in 2020. And looking at a lot of these initiatives, I think I still believe we should move the recreation grant function under the authority of the Recreation Commission. So what I'd like to propose is maybe just that a motion that we ask staff to look over the coming months into the pros and cons and feasibility of moving this, because I think as what we're getting today is a sample of different organizations, but I think our CEO talked at one point that considering something like that could better align as we do our strategic plan. Also, what, are we happy with the way we're doing recreation grants, or do we want to build them as part of a broader strategy, align with our facilities and the rest of it? So I realize I'm wearing a bit my chair of the Rec Commission right now, but if people are amenable, I'd be happy to put that motion forward subsequent to the recommendation.
Thank you. Dr. Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, first, thanks for the report, supported in general. I'm just wondering if staff considered the 6,000 remaining, what we might anticipate would come up as requests for that, and whether there was any consideration to giving that additional amount to the minor hockey group, given the significance of the request for the funds that they've made.
At this time, staff's not aware of any forthcoming requests. We also know that some groups are just getting organized after a couple of years off of a hiatus of COVID. So we thought it may be appropriate to leave a little bit of funding aside, but of course that amount is at the board's discretion, and we have no objections to the extra $6,000 for the Comox Valley Minor Hockey Association. I'm sure they'd appreciate it.
I'll wait to hear what the rest of the board has to say before considering moving that as an amendment. Thanks.
Yeah, we're still on receipt. Thanks. Director Moore.
Great, thanks, Chair. I'm actually leaning in a different direction than Director Hillian. I think it's really admirable for Komats Valley minor hockey to be looking at changing the uniforms, and it's in the spirit of reconciliation, which of course it's very important to this board. But I am concerned about only I actually think 6,000 isn't a lot of money. There's, excuse me, probably many organizations that have been hit really hard by COVID that are just scrambling to kind of get, regroup and figure out what they're going to do. And I think there will be probably some other requests. I note that that minor hockey has raised 35,000 of the 70, which leaves 35, which we would be, if this is approved, that would be 20,000 of that. It's a fairly large amount compared to anybody else. And I just frankly think it's the right thing to do. So I wouldn't be in support of a larger allocation, because I would like to have something left for anybody who may have been impacted by COVID and continues to be. I'm just going to be frank here. Comox Valley Minor Hockey, in fact, in the presentation did acknowledge that there were very few lower income youth who participated. It tends to be a sport that requires a lot of money to participate in. And I would like to reserve some funds for maybe some of those organizations that don't have the kinds of funds that they do, or maybe have lower income families participating. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Grieve.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and through the chair and the CAO to Doug. Comox Valley Exhibition Association, $10,000. This is the first question is, that's just a one-off for Function 600, right? They don't get a precedent. Are they going to be coming next year for $10,000? Is it going to revert back to a grant and aid to electoral areas?
Yes, Director Grieve, good question. This could be considered as a grant and aid for electoral areas. We thought it was more appropriate to put into the recreation grant, as it is a larger event. And as you recall, it's kind of community-wide focus, so we thought it might be better community-wide. The grant might be better as a community-wide grant. It also offers a lot of recreation opportunities within that fall fair. I think one of the notes in here is that it could become an annual request. And as you're aware, we have the rec grant annual request during the budget process. So we would have further dialogue with them, and it might be moved into that piece where you would see it prior to budget, and it would just roll over with the other 15 or so that come to you every year during the budget process for consideration, rather than a one-time event. There was another one that might be similar to that, and that's the Therapeutic Riding Society. That's another one we could see continuing on as an annual request. But we're really just getting the motion here from the board today to see if they feel it's an appropriate fit, and if so, we'll further those conversations with those two organizations in the fall to understand if it's going to be ongoing support.
Thank you, because I did reach out to Jenna Martin today at CVAX. And, going back to my theme earlier on, they're having struggles, like most organizations. As you know, Mike Trimble, Dave Stevens is no longer on the executive, Keith Curry's gone, Kim Trimble, of course, is gone. So they're regrouping. And, I'm sure that this is going to be welcome, because I think the original concept was that we would make the rental of the facility and the grant kind of a wash. So they aren't out of pocket for the site when they hold their exhibition. But just like I say, further to my original comment about volunteerism, they had planned to have a volunteer fair this year, but they couldn't find enough volunteers to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Doug. I just wanted to support Director Morin's comments about keeping the 6,000 in sort of unallocated at this point. That represents about 12%, I think, of the total amount. And I know that the staff report says future requests. I was wondering how long the intake cycle is, like how much of that remains that we're keeping this 6,000 in reserve for.
We encourage all groups to have the intakes by March 31st, but we do note that it remains open until funds are fully allocated. So it'll be until those funds are fully allocated, or it'll just carry over into next year's budget.
Okay, thanks. And I wholeheartedly support all of the allocations we're making. This is a very limited selection of the various groups that could be eligible for these kinds of grants. And I think keeping a small amount, 12% in the tank, so that we're able to help those who perhaps have had challenges getting organized this year seems very reasonable and sort of safe contingency to have.
Thank you. Director Hamir.
Thanks. I'm also going to support us keeping that 6,000. And I'm wondering if staff can comment on what kind of outreach do we do around the availability of this recreation grant? Just because, as was mentioned, there's probably a number of struggling, sports groups and who may or may not have heard about this grant. What are how is word spread, or is it sort of people have to find the grant on our website and apply? Do we have sort of an outreach on it?
Yes, the outreach is largely informal. In fact, I would say it's if groups come to the CBRD, usually through Recreation Services, through Jennifer and her team, they may point them in the direction of this grant. It's only recently we've really opened up that unallocated amount or special one-time kind of funding when we did our grant review a couple of years ago. So the actual promotion of it is largely only through our website. We don't have a large promotion base for all of our grants. It's just, unfortunately, not something we have the capacity to continue to do each year. We hope it's mostly spread by word of mouth.
Right. Okay. And just one note, if it's possible to have a flexible intake time, I know that a lot of the tournaments do take place in the winter months, even between January and March. And so for an organization to apply a year in advance seems a little bit difficult. And if we can have a late fall application, I think that would make things go a lot smoother as well. So having it, if staff want to contemplate a couple of application times, just to enable some of those tournaments that do happen, especially ice tournaments over the winter, that would be helpful. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify the Comox Valley United Soccer Club, that the request was $8,000 and that staff recommended the 6, or that was just a misprint with the 8,000?
So yes, the 8 requested 8. So in your appendix A at the top, it says 6,000. In the notes on the executive summary, it says 8. So yes, they did request 8 and staff is only recommending 6, which matches their 2020 request that the board previously supported.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, we're on receipt. Oh, Director Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you. Doug, I was just wondering if it was possible, you're talking about it being largely word of mouth, so the folks who'd had the grant before who would think to apply for it again. I know there's not a lot of resources for outreach. Is it possible to create just a few basic social media posts that some of us could share to get the word out there? Because I'm sure there are a number of organizations that could use this funds and just simply had no idea that that was a possibility. Not anything extensive, but just a few posts that we could try and get the word out with.
Yes, we can do that and work through our active Comox Valley as well. I will action that item for our recreation staff and move forward with that.
Thank you. Director Arbor.
Yeah, instead of doing my comment on the motion, I'll do it now because Director Cole Hamilton kept the conversation going. But, when I was talking about what this discussion and feedback has triggered from the other directors, especially from Director Morin, is right now it's basically, we receive application and we just respond. And as you say, how broadly it's known is variable. It's a hard word. But another alternative, say it was in the rec commission, and we said, okay, part of our strategic plan is to actually support low-income household in accessing sports and recreation. This entire grant program could be to support those clubs in reducing the cost for low-income households, and then we would have a universal grant program for all the organ. So it's just a different look rather than to be just responsive to demand. But those are the kind of discussions that I think would suit well at recreation, which is why, even though nobody commented on it, I will still put forward a motion. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further lights, we're on receipt. All in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And there's a recommendation. Grieve and Arbor move the recommendation regarding the grants. Any further discussion? Yes, Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. And I'd just like to thank my fellow directors for their comments, which I find myself in agreement with. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Director Arbor, would you like to make a secondary motion?
Yeah, thanks. Unless James is coming to the mic to say we already did it. I don't think we did, Jake, looking at Jake. Yeah, I'd just like to move subsequent to this that staff brings back a report that considers the merit and feasibility of holding function 209 under the authority of the Recreation Commission starting next year.
Okay, seconded by McCollum. Any further discussion?
Speaking to the motion, notice I haven't put a timeline on it, so the report could be due after the next election. It's not as long as it's ahead of budgeting time.
Thank you. I think Doug wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yes, function 600, the rec grant service. Just a clarification.
Why am I reading 209?
Function 600. Okay.
Section of the act that refers to voting.
Thank you. Okay. So any further discussion on the motion? And full board, all in favor? Anyone opposed? One opposed? Director Grieve? That's carried. Thank you. And we're on to item 4. Director, Remuneration and Expense Bylaw Review. Hillian and Grant, thank you. I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And James Warren, Deputy CAO, is here to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Russell, and good afternoon, Directors. Bylaw 236 is your Komats Valley Regional District Remuneration and Expenses Bylaw, and it establishes the remuneration and expenses for the Board of Directors and your committees. The bylaw requires an independent review be undertaken before local government elections, and that review was initiated late last year. Julie Case presented to you in January the methodology that should be undertaken for that review, and some of the interests that you noted as a board were looking at ways in which elected officials might be attracted to run for office, possibly non-monetary actions around perhaps supporting childcare and maintaining a healthy work-life balance, and also ensuring that the comparator organizations included both Strathcona and Nanaimo though not necessarily including those in the remuneration averages. The review that was undertaken, it didn't identify any specific changes for the non-monetary aspects, but that was maybe in part because the comparator organizations didn't identify any. There are other organizations around the province, and I think we've seen them across the country that do look for some of these ways to entice further elected officials to run for office. But of the comparator organizations that we looked at, there were none that jumped out, or there were no programs that were identified. The review findings identify that the RD's remuneration for the chair, municipal and electoral area directors, and the meeting participation are near the midpoint, and that's aligned with the compensation philosophies of the regional district. There was no obvious or specific increases to the remuneration and expenses in that review. And so with the exception of including payments for the CVRD vice chair beginning in 2023, and setting annual increases for the chair, vice chair, EA, and municipal directors aligned with the table 1 that's in the staff report. Staff would be recommending that the changes to the bylaw proceed on that basis. One of the big changes that we are suggesting here is that rather than aligning increases with the BC Consumer Price Index, which is the way in which the bylaw is currently aligned, that we provide some fixed rates, some fixed remuneration rates in the bylaw itself. There's risk in aligning the annual increases with the CPI, given the potential volatility in that index. And also the CVRD doesn't have control over the CPI. And so, so by setting fixed rates, the CVRD can plan for remuneration increases, and that provides certainty for both elected officials and the public. And so, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thanks so much, James. Director Arbour.
Thanks. I was just receiving praises at EVICC around us having CPI index directors remuneration, and people talking about in other sectors how it would be nice to see that. I think CPI matters when you're on low income. The people that get hit the most are those that are low income. It doesn't affect as much those of higher incomes, and but that's fine. I think that the rates that you identified are generally aligned and acceptable. I was kind of hoping to see a little more on the non-mandatory stuff, and I realized it didn't show up in the. So you're leaving it in our hands, so to speak, to make specific proposals. And I mean, just today in the paper, North Saanich Councillor Pearson just was the first to, to bring to North Saanich and benefit from a parental leave, and that's great. That's progressive policy. I don't think, but it's hard. It's hard for us without having anything to chew on to come up with it, because I would love to say, let's. So I don't know what the next step would be if we want to bring that forward. It says, at the discretion of the directors, but do you want us to come up with stuff today or to email it to the board? Like, you didn't leave a process for us to, okay, you'll have an answer on that. I'll let you have the answer, then maybe one more.
Sure, thanks. You're right, the comparator organizations didn't identify any, so we recognize that there's no suggested wording or changes or programs in this report. If the directors have a specific interest in where you'd like us to investigate, whether it be parental leave or childcare, or I believe the pension plans was also identified in the discussion in January, we could then undertake some research and come back with some language and options if the board was interested in that. So not looking for you to come up with specific wording or changes on the fly here, but direction to us to investigate further.
Okay, yeah, I guess the mistake was probably not to put that in motion, because you're right. We mentioned all these things back in January, but we're not, we're being asked to do it again, and maybe in the form of a motion. I would be prepared to move that we look at all these things and the potential impact, childcare, parental leave, transit rec, and the non-monetary side, matching, contribution. And then I guess it would be a conversation about whether those are reasonable things to enact. I think we had an exhaustive relationship, that a conversation last board, that our pay structure was not favorable to lower income people and to women and diversity candidates and the rest of it. So I don't want to leave it sitting there. I think we should address it. There's a lot that's being done in a lot of places. And even though the amounts are not great, it's that acknowledgement, I think, that matters. Otherwise, on the overall structure, I do believe directors should get paid based on the number of services that their jurisdiction participates in. But I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Grief.
Well, how about bringing back extended health benefits for people who are over 69 years old? Because what happens is, this is fairly ageist, as you know. If you're 70 or over, you're cut off. And that's when you maybe need more dental work, hearing aids, glasses every 2 years instead of every 4 years. So I think that is ageist, is age discrimination. It could be argued. But, I think that the big issue is not that so much. I think, we put this out and we're going to be voting on this structure. And it's a very creative $1,000 a year, basically, which is about 2.5%. But if you look at the what's going on in the real world, U.S. Consumer Price Index is expected to grow to 8.5 this year. That's the fastest rise in over 4 decades. Stats Can, we're looking at 5.7 ending in March of inflation. We've seen our tax assessment on our houses go up 40% or more. So I'm going to urge people not to vote for this because we're basically tying the hands of the future board members when we really don't know what's around the corner. We're assuming, based on what has transpired in the last, 10 years, that this is going to be reasonable. It's not going to be reasonable. We're living in a totally new age here. And I would say that we should defer this until we see, when the new board gets in after the election in 2023, what the trends really are. Because if you want people to stand up, back to my volunteerism thing, you got a shrinking pool of people. And what we are doing is basically a volunteer position with the stipends, because you can probably make twice as much money driving for Amazon or something than you can working here. So it's not a career. So young people, unless they're independently wealthy or have one member of the family that's making really good bucks, it's very difficult to do this. So I would caution. I'm not going to support it at all. Thank you.
Director Hamir.
Thank you. I too was actually going to ask us to defer this decision, but not for the reasons that Director Greaves mentioned, but I think they're quite valid. Regarding, I think we may just want to consider whether or not we are going to a set amount or consumer price index, because if we don't, it's going to require, in future, a very large bump. So I just want to consider that. But the reason I was asking or thinking that we might want to defer was because the non-monetary compensation, specifically around childcare, I think in the report, it noted child minding, and I don't think that's what this board probably had in mind. I think we were looking at some kind of ability for counselors to claim childcare expenses. Not that the CVRD was going to have childcare here. So, just as a way, again, to reduce the barriers for people who might consider running, but, due to their parental responsibilities can't. So at AVICC and LGLA recently, I did speak to a few counselors, and some mentioned, I believe in Terrace, there is an ability to claim all childcare expenses. So I'd like to just have an idea of models of what's available, because I think we missed that in this report. I don't think we're in any kind of rush to, really accept this. We've got some time before the election, But I think it's something that we do want to pass before the election, just so that when people are considering running, they know, exactly what's available to them. And I think it's actually a really good legacy for us to leave, that we've left the ability for future directors to be able to, run knowing that some of the barriers have been reduced. So thanks.
Thank you. Director Morin.
Great, thanks, Chair. Yeah, in agreement with Director Hamir and others, I was wanting to see something on the non-monetary, particularly childcare as well. I did speak to a couple folks, as Director Hamir did, who do have childcare expenses included in it. It actually amounts to very, very little, but it gives the ability, and particularly with evening meetings when their regular childcare provider is closed, to be able to have a babysitter come in or whatever. And of course, our meetings do go late sometimes. The other issue is also around attending special committees or even events. If you're going to a conference or something like that. Had a brief conversation with Mayor Tate and Sue, and she was saying, she had to foot the bill for her childcare during conferences because it was seen as a frivolous expense, which is really unfortunate because, it really doesn't amount to very much. There are some local governments that have like a $40 a day cap for those special events. And then there's others that have childcare expenses for those late meetings or whatever. And this isn't just a gender issue, because of course we have parents of all ages and yeah. So I think that it is something that we should look at in further detail, and maybe the comparators I know are all regional districts, but I think that this is something that we do see across the province being enacted. I know it's something I'm going to bring forward to Courtney, and the parental leave policy, which to me is not connected to the remuneration because it's more about providing that time off. So I support this going back for another look. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McCollum.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, picking up on that topic, I would certainly support having childcare expenses considered when we're looking at remuneration for whoever we pass the torch to on this board going forward. It's hard to imagine that adding the ability for a director to submit a childcare expense would really have a huge impact on what the board's expenses are overall, but it could actually have a pretty big impact on an individual who's considering whether or not to run. And of course, the biggest impact is for people wanting to serve in public office who are single parents, but we know in this community that there are many families that have a spouse that works out of town or shift work. It's not just about this one group, and providing that recognition that having meetings that are out of hours of childcare is just extending who we envision serving our community and not limiting it to people whose lives fit a certain criteria or stereotype. So I'm definitely in support of the other comments that were made. And then just some overall comments. I can see the rationale of opting for a fixed increase, especially given that going forward, we don't provide that generally for our contracted workers. So providing that, we often compare that we're compensated to a much lesser degree than our unionized staff. And but conversely, I don't think that we want to give ourselves a benefit that we're not really willing to consider when we're negotiating with other sector or with other groups of employees. So I do support the fixed increase. I would also be convinced that if we could consider a higher amount. we're below the average. For all of our comparators, we're the lowest on the island. And moving it up to the proposed amount would put us on par with what those places were casting backwards. And, you know, I think all the boards that are looking at wage compensation are going to be looking at the current state of affairs. And there was a headline this morning that inflation in the US hit 8.5% in March. So I think we do need to really consider just the escalating costs of living on the island and making sure that serving in public office is something that people can afford to do looking forward. So those are all the comments I want to make.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess just to add that on Director Greaves' comments about it not really being a career, I found out recently that when applying for a loan, that as an elected official, it's not really considered a real job because of the term component of it. So
You're above musician.
So that's just something else to consider, and probably something the public wasn't aware of.
Depending on which lender you go to, I've used this in the past for other people and they accepted it as good income. So there you go.
So some banks do, some banks don't. Okay, keep looking. Thank you. Director Hillian?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I support the fixed increase. I don't know that tying this to cost of living is going to greatly increase the number of people who see it as a viable way to earn a living. I think that's a bit of a stretch, quite frankly, but obviously we don't want people to fall behind. I certainly think we want to make this decision before the next term. That's one of the basic principles, that we don't vote on this for ourselves. We vote on it and then give the electorate a chance to pass judgment. I want to add my voice of support to there being a provision for childcare. But picking up on one of Director Greaves' comments, we have an increasing number of people who have expenses related to elder care, whether it's an elderly parent or an ailing spouse. And, you know, the question comes up, where do you draw the line in terms of wanting to be an equal opportunity employer? There may be an argument for having a category of expenses that can be claimed based on specific need related to individual circumstances, rather than slotting it into a number of categories. Just a thought. Thanks.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up, and I'm sure staff could make a note of that. It sounds like we still do want to defer so that staff can bring back the issue of childcare, as well as some of the other non-monetary topics that we've discussed, but that we would want it to come back before election time. So not to put that on the next board, newly elected. So we are on receipt. So we'll come off of receipt so that we can possibly make another motion regarding this. Okay, all in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And so there is a recommendation, but it sounds like we want to come up with a different one. Director Grave.
I'd like to refer this back to staff for some more study, and to include some of the conversation that's gone around this table, and not to lose the fact that extended health benefits are very important. And I don't think you should be cut off according to age, especially when you have long time service for the regional district. Thank you.
Madam Chair, before the recommendation goes any further, I would ask for specifics. Exactly what is it you would like to investigate, and it to be referred to your consultant, Julie Case, that's undertaking the work. Staff are just merely coordinating the work that she's doing on your behalf.
Okay. Director Grave.
Yeah, as a mover, then can we not have staff to reach out to the individual board members?
I think for the benefit of the public who ultimately, are very interested in this particular matter, it's better in a public forum to identify your interests and what they are, for Julie to investigate them on your behalf, and then staff to bring her report or findings back to you. But again, I think specifics directed by all the board as opposed to individuals would be the best way to go.
Right.
Okay, it was seconded by Director Hamir. Maybe we can amend it with specifics.
Well, I could make a separate motion. What
Okay,
do you prefer?
staff's going to bring it up onto the screen.
Yeah.
Also, I believe James has been taking notes of our discussion. Maybe he could add to some of the specifics that are being requested.
Right. Oh, I see.
I think if I could, I think it would be helpful here to have the topic areas that you're interested in. I heard a couple of directors list off a few different topic areas. So currently the only one on there is extended health benefits.
So I can make a list.
The directors want to add to that list here, then that would be what the board votes on.
Okay, Director Arbor, do you want to add to the list?
And I would say, I guess what's of interest to the board and to ratepayers as well is the financial impact. So if that can be included in the following list. So extended healthcare benefits, child care, elder care, thank you, special needs. So basically care for someone that is close to you while you come. Yeah, family care. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Caregiving expenses. Very good board. I think we had a discussion, and I would include it again. I think it will allow us to look at the potential financial impact, but RSP match. Considering that elected official, unlike employees of the regional districts, do not partake in a pension fund. And in a review of existing transit and recreation benefits, which are non-monetary, those ones for sure. I can think of more. Did we? I'm looking for help from fellow directors now. And the thought is not to pass all those, but I think what we heard from our CAO is to have an exhaustive list that you can bring back. You can do a little bit of analysis on what the financial impact would be, and then we can make decisions from there.
Dr. Moore.
I wanted to bring up the comparator piece as well, because I think that the comparators could be expanded, particularly on the non-monetary. I can see the comparators being important to other regional districts with the pay scale, but in terms of the non-monetary, I think it would be helpful to expand the research to other local governments, municipal governments as well across the province, because there are some that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I don't know if we could include that in the motion, but thanks.
And James, did we miss anything?
No, I think that list is covered off what's been talked about. From a research perspective, the comparators are exactly that, so that directors are able to understand how this regional district fits with the other regional districts on a comparison type level, so that as best we can, we're comparing apples to apples, and we're not comparing ourselves to organizations that are either much smaller or larger or have a different set of circumstances altogether. There's 180 some local governments across the province, and that's a huge group to go looking at to try to identify organizations to either model an approach on or do the research on. So I'm just trying to picture in my mind how I have the conversation with our consultant to undertake that kind of research, because it could be very, very extensive. And I've heard a couple of organizations, communities that maybe do offer some of these programs, so we can investigate those in particular. And I've seen some in the media myself. But I just want to put a bit of a limit on some of that research as well, because it could undertake a lot of time.
Okay, Director Arbor?
I don't know if other directors agree, but at its simplest form in my mind, I just imagine a table, right? With all these listed on the left-hand side at different, so for example, I'll just pick RSP match, say it's $1,000 RSP match, right? Or a $2,000 RSP match. Same with the, just to look at the financial impact. So maybe we don't take a deep dive around everything that exists around the province, but what could be, so a care, like for a director estimate that, you know, they might need 10, 20 meetings, only 2 directors will use it. Therefore, the financial impact will be $400 for the board as a whole. That kind of basic financial impact analysis, I think, is where that ratepayers will be interested in, and board directors as well. Because I think you're right. If you go into the minutia of every program that might exist out there, it will be a long study. But I didn't see James kind of smile at my suggestion, so maybe I'm missing the mark a little bit.
I think we could probably take this away. And I understand what you're looking for. I understand the financial impact side of it. And of course, it's all subscription-based, application-based. It's only an impact for those who are going to be using the services or the benefits. So I think there's probably enough here. We can take this away, and whether we work with our consultant again or undertake a bit more high-level approach to it.
Okay. So the motion's on the floor. Has it been first and seconded? Yes. Yes, okay.
No, this isn't. We just have a civil motion, right? We really need a motion that has these pieces.
And the amendment was this part.
It's not from.
Yeah, I'll move the amendment.
Okay, the amendments moved by Arbor, seconded by Hamir. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And on the original motion, as amended, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. All right, so we're on to item 5, which is the Island Corridor Foundation financial commitment.
Second.
Grant and Cole Hamilton, thank you. I'll pass it to staff.
And Madam Chair and Directors, Jake Martins, General Manager, Corporate Services, is here to present this report at your request and outline the findings and options available to you and answer your questions.
Thank you, Russell, and through the chair. Excuse me. This report is provided, as Russell notes, at the direction of the board and in support of the board's reassessment of the financial commitment to the Island Corridor Foundation. There is a considerable history with respect to the Island Rail Corridor, but really the initiative to restore the railway was spearheaded or kickstarted with the local government perspective back in 2012. And it was at this time when the regional districts that all lie within the corridor pledged to combine $3.2 million. This was anticipated to confirm a commitment of approximately $20 million from the senior levels of government needed to restore the line. The CBRD's portion, $392,000 of that, was raised through a one-time grant and aid that was funded through a tax requisition of the Administration and General Government Service. Unfortunately, the federal government's commitment was not realized at that time, which led to stalled momentum on a number of fronts. And subsequently, there was a civil claim that was launched by one of the members, and further concerns then were also raised about the cost increases for restoration. This led to the decision of the regional district and Nanaimo, and following that, the Alberni-Clackamas Regional District to rescind their financial commitments. And so after nearly 2 decades since the ICF was established, the board's reassessment of its commitment is certainly warranted. And in particular light of the public interest around this matter, the transportation opportunities that exist along the corridor, and the lack of a definitive result or progress in regards to the restoration. As part of the board's assessment, it did direct the engagement with Comox First Nation, as well as to write to the federal and provincial governments to encourage some urgency in regards to their assessment and decision regarding this matter. Correspondence has been sent, although to date, I'm not aware that we've received a response from those ministries. With respect to Comox First Nation, a meeting was held on February 24th. And there was a variety of feedback, which is summarized in the report before the board, but certainly noted that they were interested to see if any progress or momentum could be gained in the next 12 to 16 months before the CVRD makes a decision about the funding commitment. While this is not connected, the feedback from Comox First Nation certainly closely aligns with another important development with respect to the efforts of the ICF. In 2021, the dismissal of a claim brought forward by the Snanaas First Nation was upheld by the BC Court of Appeal. And the First Nation was seeking a declaration that the land was no longer being used for the purpose of the railway and should therefore revert back to the Crown for use and benefit as part of its reserved lands. The judgment did not find in their favor due to ICF's ongoing maintenance and the consideration being given to the funding project by the federal and provincial governments. However, the court did rule that if funding is not granted by March of 2023, they didn't specify that date, but essentially they gave a time period that the First Nation can return to the court to then seek to reinforce the reversion. So this is certainly an important matter, and this timeline which the federal government has in which to respond is a key factor in staff's recommendation to essentially maintain the funds for now or maintain the status quo in anticipation of this timeline coming to fruition in 2023. So that's one of the options, of course, noted in the staff report. There's three others, which include reversing the requisition in 2023. This would, with the total annual requisition to each of the jurisdictions, would be reduced by the funding requisition for the Island Corridor Foundation on a proportional basis. Option 3 listed in the report is to redirect the funding through a one-time grant to a nonprofit organization or to a public authority for a project or program of regional significance. And lastly, the option is to redirect the funding to a suitable CVRD regional service with a corresponding service area and or participants. With that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jake. Are there any questions on the ICF report? Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I have a few comments about it and one question. I guess overall, I'm not supportive of the recommendation, and I'm leaning toward option 4 in the report. This money was set aside with the expectation of that $20 million that was referred to in the report, and that was 9 years ago. We've seen no measurable progress in that time, and I think we have a responsibility to kind of recognize that this is funds that we leveraged from our local community in hopes of seeing rail come back, but we've really not seen any signs of success in that department. It also stands out for me that not only did this $20 million not arrive, but $20 million would not do anything to get rail back in any usable form. The report gives a range of $200 to $700 million, and that's just to get the infrastructure back up and usable. That doesn't really speak to the cost of ongoing funding for a rail operation. So I just don't really see a lot of benefit to us as a region to continue to tie this $400,000 up. Certainly rail would be a wonderful service to see resume, and I have no doubt that every person in this room would have was very hopeful when ICF was formed, just at the possibility that rail was not gone forever. But currently, I don't see a path forward, and I don't think that delaying our decision on this money really serves any true purpose in redeveloping the rail service. what ICF has proposed, or my understanding at least, is that even with these estimates, we're still looking at a 40-kilometer-an-hour trail service. And what we're putting off is the possibility of developing a gravel pathway that would connect, downtown Courtney with Royce or with Union Bay. And an e-bike travels 32 kilometers an hour, and this train that we have no path towards is 8 kilometers an hour faster, maybe. So realistically, I think when we envision rail returning, we're not envisioning a 40-kilometer-an-hour rail service. We're envisioning something that would actually incentivize people to leave their car at home and hop on a train to Victoria, and a 40-kilometer-an-hour rail service is not going to do that. So realistically, were we to see rail return in a format that would actually have us transition away from fossil fuels, it would probably not be on the infrastructure that we're talking about seeing reinvigorated in this corridor. So I did have one question now that I've been explaining my position, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, this was my question. So the ICF has said that there is a possibility of developing rail and trail. And I think that's why we haven't really gotten to a decision point, is that the idea of having both of those on this corridor would be ideal. However, we do have trestle over the Trent River. And to my knowledge, we don't have anywhere where there's a bridge on this corridor where there is in fact trail and rail. And I'm wondering if in any of our discussions or the information that we've received from ICF, if we've ever had an indication of just what that price difference would be in developing a trail system were it to go parallel to the railway tracks rather than lifting up the rail bed as it is right now.
Thank you, through the chair. So my understanding is currently the city of Courtney and the trail that's been developed within their jurisdiction is the one clear, obvious place where that sort of work has been done with the ICF and the local government. With respect to the portion within the electoral areas, there has not been a license of occupation or other sort of legal mechanism in which the regional district has established a sort of a basis on which to develop trail or to work with the ICF around that. But that is in place in other jurisdictions, so it's not to say it can't happen. But as far as the details on the development of both rail and trail and the costs or other realities of that, certainly I'm not in a position to speak to those details beyond that.
Okay, thanks. I'll let others weigh in. I have some other comments, perhaps.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Hillian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm in general agreement with much of what Director McCollum has said, although I take very seriously the comments of Comox First Nation and their interest in the resumption of rail service if possible. So it makes it a very difficult issue to come down firmly on. But I do want to clarify, the report indicates that the funding has been rescinded by both the Nanaimo Regional District and the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
And we also have correspondence indicating that the Capital Regional District has put some conditions on their continued pledge. Do we know what's behind that, or what any of those details?
Through the chair, I don't know the details of those. I'm not sure if that's representative to the ICF, if Director Arbor has any details on that, but I don't know the specifics of that.
So we're talking about 5 regional districts that are involved in this process, 2 of which are withdrawn. 1 may have conditions, and we're considering it here. It's not exactly an overwhelming endorsement of optimism about this process going forward. But, before voting on this, I would like to know if there's a middle position here other than we just leave things as they are just now and consider it again a year or so from now when the Supreme Court's dictum to the nation has reached its time, because it strikes me that it would be useful to see if there is a middle position that we can take, where we don't necessarily fully withdraw this commitment, but we make it conditional, and so at least our citizens know that we are committed to making a decision one way or the other within a certain time frame and based on other circumstances which may prevail. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Hamir.
Thanks. Well, Director Hillian's given a bit of, food for thought. I'm sort of considering that. I was more in line with Director McCollum's comments about not leaving the money where it is, moving it into something that I think our community would much prefer. I don't think returning it to the electorate would really make a huge difference on their tax returns. I read $8 or something per household. That's really, I don't think that's what our community is asking for. We've had a lot of asks for active transportation routes and bike routes, and people do want to be out and into the community. So my question was, staff mentioned in the report potentially redirecting these funds to a regional parks service. Is there a service that we can put this money into that would be more active transportation oriented, or is that the service, parks, because of the trails portion of it?
Through the chair. So yeah, I think the key point here is to identify a service that's eligible for it to be transferred into, and then certainly that aligns with the interests, I suppose, of the original requisition or of the board's intent for the use of those funds. With regards to parks, the regional parks function has not been established at this point, as the board's aware, so that would not be eligible in my view to transfer into that service until it is established. The alternative, if the interest is around active transportation in parks, would be to direct a portion of the funds to the electoral area services parks service, and then a corresponding amount to the municipalities for a similar allocation. That's yeah, I suppose that's what I see the options being.
Okay. And just one other question, if I may, to the chair, because I know you would have probably been in the room with the discussions with KFN. Were they aware of the in the retraction of funds from the Nanaimo and Alberni-Clayoquot? Because to me, it sounds like there's just not going to be rail north of Nanaimo. And if this is something that the nation is kind of holding out hope for, I'm just wondering if they understood like what the conditions are currently on that corridor.
In our monthly meetings, this was not one of the issues that we brought to them specifically. So I don't really have any more information than what was in the letter in that regard.
Okay.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I'd just like to add something from a perspective of the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District, because while they may have taken back the funds that were allocated for this purpose, that did not rule out that they would have to, if the project came to fruition and the ask was made again, that they wouldn't be putting their minds to the potential of having to tax for and raise the funds. So don't assume that no means no forever. Right. I can't speak for the RDM, but I know that was on the minds of the ACRD directors when they considered.
And thanks to our CAO for that, because I think similarly for the Comox Valley, even if we take this money back, I don't think it means no forever. I think this board, if something very tangible came to the table with a funding proposal that had buy-in from both province and federal government, I think this board would be extremely amenable to taxation for that. But I think the original 9 year ago, 392,000, I think that's going to be woefully small and inadequate for anything going forward. I don't think it makes sense to just sort of sit in a holding pattern. It won't do. We'll have to probably up that amount quite considerably now with inflation. So I think it makes better sense to use those funds for another purpose, like active getting out into the community and just moving forward rather than having those funds sit.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm also questioning the utility of keeping these funds allocated as they are, and along the same lines that Director McCollum first raised. And it has been 20 years since the ICF was created, and it's been 8 years or 9 years since they've had these funds. And I feel like we're kicking it down the road. And unfortunately, this corridor has more than one potential use, but none of them are occurring right now. It's just a contiguous piece of land, and I think that what our CAO was just saying about Alberni-Clackwood, I would agree with, if we were to withdraw these funds and then we found out next week that $2 billion was being put into, a train that could travel at 100 kilometers an hour and room for ideally for trails beside it, then I'm sure we would support it. I mean, I've, as a kid who had a model train set, it goes against my deep instincts to the idea of not supporting rail. But I think, it's been 2 decades for the ICF to put together the conditions and the studies to get the funding. And I guess I'm questioning and asking a minute to Director Arbour is that it seems to me that if funding is to be put together by March 2023, 12 months from now, that given the speed with which governments move, that things would be quite advanced in terms of discussions with the federal and provincial governments if the kind of funds that we're talking about, and given it's north of 700 million just to get back a 40-kilometer-an-hour railroad. And I think, as we all know, with project costs, if it's over 700 now, it's going to come in at $1 billion when costs are finally in. That's for a I haven't heard signals from either level of government, the province or the feds, that that's something they intend to do. And the roadmap to 2030 is probably a good way of reading the provincial government's intent, given this would clearly have, restoring rail would be a part of their climate plan. And there's just not, the word rail does not appear in the roadmap to 2030. And I think if they were planning on a investment of several hundred million or $1 billion on rail on the island, I think that they would probably highlight that as a direction they were going in, and they were putting considerable resources towards. So I think the complete silence in that document indicates that maybe this is not a good place to continue parking funds, which could go towards, could be moving towards active transportation. And the one thing that did make me conflicted, and I was thinking similar to what Director Hilliam was saying, was the Comox First Nations interest in seeing if this can occur. I don't think that withdrawing the funds would have a very detrimental effect. It's sort of the only negative I could see in the staff report of withdrawing these funds is it might, quote, potentially signal a lack of confidence. And I think the fact that other RDs have already withdrawn their funds, probably that ship has sailed. The question of confidence in the ICF's ability to get the funding in place. So I don't think we would be weakening that effort. And of course, if funding somehow did come into place, I think, speaking for myself, I'd be happy to start this conversation afresh and see what funding would be appropriate for the CVRD. But for those reasons, I think I'd support option 4 and withdraw this funding and put it into a service that could support active transportation. And I guess there's that question to Director Arbour, having been at the table of the ICF. I'm not sure if you are the chair. Well, sorry, if you are able to, Chair, allow you to comment on whether you've heard intimations that that scale of funding is imminent in the next 12 months.
Okay, Director Moran hasn't commented yet, so we'll go to her next.
Yeah, thanks, Director Cole-Hamilton, for bringing up the roadmap to 2030, because I was going to say that 20 years ago was a long time ago, even 9 years ago was a long time ago. A lot has changed in terms of our direction, looking at GHG emissions and use of fossil fuels, and whether traditional rail really fits within that plan at all. Certainly maybe something that was electric and fast could fit within that. But I just see, I know that we have had many people bring that up, that it seems very misaligned with the direction that we're trying to go in. So yeah, I'm in agreement with more in line with option 4. And I would also note that Comox First Nation, I think, takes those things extremely seriously as well in terms of environmental protection of the lands that have been pillaged and desecrated. So I think that there are ways that we can support Comox First Nation when and if a plan comes forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Director McCollum.
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on some of the commentary that's been made. Yeah, making the decision to terminate this contribution agreement that's been in place with ICF, it's not really an indication that we don't want to see rail in our region. It's an acceptance or a recognition that there's really no path forward for rail, and that it's time to consider other options. One question that I have with regards to option 4, I mean, I see the potential of these funds in developing this asset to provide some active travel, but I'm not sure that we have, we don't have the parks service in place right now, and that would be an obvious fit, and it's something that isn't an option for us at this point in time. So I guess my other question is whether or not we could move to terminate the ICF contribution agreement that's outlined in the report as a requirement for option 2, 3, or 4. And if we could defer the decision on what to do with the $392,000 until after the board receives the report on the park service. I don't know if that's complicating this one too many steps, but just curious to hear if that is something we could do.
Through the chair, simple answer would no. I think that's totally possible to do one and then defer the postponed consideration of the decision as far as allocation goes. Yeah, so certainly appreciate whatever the will of the board is on that.
Okay. In that case, I would like to move that we term. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry.
And there's still
some
lights to go here.
Sorry, I have another motion subsequent to that one too. Just a heads up.
Oh, you guys are turning on and off. Director Grafe.
He who speaks last speaks best. So Director Arbour is going to have the last word, but you have to remember that this money is a marker. It's there to show, like a lot of grant funding out there, you have to show some community support. This is there just to show that, yes, we support in concept the idea of rail on Vancouver Island. And I agree with Director Morin. I mean, we're not talking about belching diesel locomotives here. By 2030, with the amount of reductions we're going to have to reach, just look at Europe. Look at the incredible rail system they have there, all electric, zero emissions. Nothing rolls with less friction than a railway. So it's the cheapest possible way of moving goods and people. It sounds far-fetched right now, but look how things have changed as was our Zena said in the last 10 years or so. Things have really changed, and they're going to ramp up. They're going to change even more. So don't preclude the concept of a high-speed electric rail, or maybe not a super high-speed electric rail, but something that would move goods and services. Obviously, we're not going to do it for $380,000 or what the heck we got in the bank, but that shows good faith. That's why it's there. So I would say we've waited this long. We can wait until the rubber or the steel wheels hit the rails next next March when it really comes right down to it, and see if there's the deadline is going to force the hand of government. I would say in the time I've been elected official, they've pretty well played silly bugger with this thing the whole way, saying this and that, but never intending to do it. So I don't think it's been in good faith yet, but I think it does check all the boxes on where we want to go for climate change. So I would think that just having that in the bank as good faith would go a long way in if it ever comes to the point where there's a decision made by senior government. It just shows that we have skin in the game.
Thank you. And we haven't heard from Director Swifts. Go ahead, Director.
Thank you. I think a rail would be fantastic and a trail would be fantastic. And but I do agree with the comments around the table that it's probably unlikely we're going to see it. But having waited this long, I don't think there's any harm in waiting another year to find out whether there is any movement with a deadline looming. It isn't a lot of money, but I would hate to move it into another service and then have to go back to the public and try and drum up some enthusiasm with starting at zero. So I really don't think we've waited this long, and I don't see any harm in waiting till this time next year when we have a little bit more information. I would like a deadline though, because I think that's important with this money.
Thank you. So Director Arbor, Director Hillian has this light on. Okay, we'll go to Director Hillian. Go ahead.
Thanks. My inclination would be to defer making a decision. I think that the public listening in can probably pick up in general what the views of this board are. But I remember talking to people, elected representatives in the capital region previously, who were really committed to maintaining the corridor to achieve commuter reign out to the West Shore and potentially up to the Cowichan Valley and Nanaimo as well. And if they have, in fact, as our correspondent indicates, put some limitations on their continued support, I'd like to find out more about what those are, because I don't want a decision that we make to jeopardize the overall viability of those possibilities coming to fruition. And I think that there's more to be learned here about what our colleagues in the southern part of the region see as the options. I also know that although we hear overwhelmingly from people who want to see us loosen the strings here and get a functioning trail happening for the tourist and recreational benefits that it'll bring, economic and recreational. There are significant numbers of people in the community who say that you don't give up an active transportation corridor ever, that once it's gone, it's gone. So I would like us to ideally defer this decision until we can, at the very least, find out what in fact the aspirations are of our elected colleagues in the southern part of Vancouver Island. And I do agree that we should have a time limit, and I think that if there's a way of letting the Island Corridor Foundation know that that we basically are prepared to give this another 12 to 18 months, and then our intent would be to make use of these funds for other active transportation purposes or parks functions or whatever. That puts us on notice, both in terms of the foundation and our community. Thanks.
Thank you. And finally, Director Arbor.
Thanks. Everyone's waiting. That's awesome. So thanks, because as your member rep, I do want to bring forward the opinions of the board and the representation to the ICF. And I don't think we've had as an extensive discussion in the term about the status of the ICF. Of course, a lot of things have changed, including the court case the last 2 years, and I have to separate in my brain the stuff that's in camera versus at the ICF versus here. I will pick up just some comments. So I guess ICF is still working on Plan A, as you know, which is to restore the rail that is in their mission and mandate. I've reported on that before. The second, Dr. Cole Hamilton had a question around the likelihood of provincial and federal investment. What I and others have not witnessed yet is any collective political movement by our MLAs and our MPs to pound the table in Ottawa or in Victoria to make this project happen. Usually on a project of that magnitude, you would have multiple champions speaking often on a project like that. And instead we have heard close to crickets from our MLAs and MPs on Vancouver Island. So, and in terms of the ICF itself, we have had a productive relationship with the Ministry of Transportation in the sense that they paid for and conducted themselves the assessment. And they're currently in talks with the ICF around some of the business cases and such. But as far as I'm aware, as member of the board of ICF, we do not have any kind of financial commitment with 12 months left in terms of where we're at with the what Jake reported on in terms of the court case. So in that context, at the board of ICF, there's discussions around the Plan Bs for sure. Those discussions, unless our members direct us otherwise, are confined by our mission and mandate of the ICF. So when you talk about lifting rail, there has been no mandate or mission by our members to look at that. I think we have had discussion in the regional district around early in the term, actually, around the fact that why haven't we built trails or a lot of trails in our particular region is, I think Dr. McCollum is correct. There's a lot of crossings. There's a reason why the Rotary Trail stops behind Walmart is just to get past Millard Creek and through Millard Park is a major investment. And so I can imagine even politicians before us, before our board probably looked at that. And the only logical way would be if you can lift the rail, of course you would do that because that would cost nothing compared to having to do another bridge, and same with the Trent River and et cetera. You're probably looking at magnitudes of investment. I think Doug DeMarzo on a napkin thing 2 years ago had told me, it's probably 10 or 20 times more expensive in our region to put something beside than if you could simply use the rail bed. So there's no doubt that I think some of the comments made here today for active transportation, which is in our active transportation strategy, but you would require, and so that's something that should be clarified for Plan B at ICF in the regional district as well, is if not Plan A with the months ticking by, we would all love to see a Plan A and the 100-kilometer train and all those things. But if not, at what point do you start thinking more proactively as members of the board around that? So that's, I don't want to actually even bias the decision today. I think that if motions are put, that helps me. If motions are put forward, either to defer or to have an alternative course of action, like Director McCollum was talking about, I'll be happy to take your thoughts back to the ICF. And that's my comments.
Thank you. Okay, we're on receipt. Yeah, I guess I haven't really weighed in, but I don't really see that there's anything at this point forcing us to make a decision. And there is some information lacking, I think, both in regard to the ICF decision and our own decision at the regional district around regional parks function. So there's not a good agreement on where those funds would be reallocated, and we're not really prepared at this point, I think, to reallocate those funds. So it seems to me that it's not a good time to be making the decision at this point. So I would prefer to defer it, but with an end date, as was described. I think that Director Hillian's suggestion around maybe a 12-month end date where we will decide on the fate of these funds would be good. Yeah, but I don't see any further lights. So I will call the question on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. There's a recommendation, or if the recommendation is not wanting to be moved, there is a. Okay, Director Grant first. Is there a second on the recommendation? Which is that the board maintain the commitments under the ICF contribution agreement, whereby the funds remain in the unallocated surplus reserve within the administration and general government function. Oh, you need to turn on your, yeah. Oh, sorry. No, wait, Larry.
Yeah, that would put an end date of, and I would ask Russell, would be April 15th of 2023 be an adequate date? That would be all the way of March and then 2 weeks following. Because they just said March, so could be the last day, could be the first, I don't know.
Yep, referring to Jake, we consider that to be reasonable.
Okay, there you go. That'll be it.
Okay, so that's different than the recommendation, which says until such time as ICF proceeds with the rail infrastructure improvement. Yeah. So the amendment is that until 12 months' time, right? Okay, and seconded by Director Grieve. Any further discussion on the motion? Director McCollum.
Yeah, I think I could support this. I don't have a lot of faith that we'll be having a different conversation in a year's time. And I also don't believe that taking or giving some thought to what else could happen on this corridor means that we are advocating for the corridor to be broken up. It doesn't mean that we don't envision it maybe returning to rail in 20 or 30 years. It's just recognizing that it's been a stranded asset for quite some time, and it's time to give other possibilities some consideration. And so I could certainly support the motion as it is, but I would also like to suggest that we consider a subsequent motion that would direct our representative on the ICF board to initiate a process that would open up considering a revision to the ICF's mandate that allows for other potential uses on the corridor, rather than strictly championing a rail use.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. Well, subject to the wording, I think Councillor McCollum's hit on a good idea because, you know, regardless of what we decide to do, the Island Corridor Foundation owns the line. And nothing's going to happen on that line, on that corridor, until the Island Corridor Foundation decides that something should happen, whether it's rail or something else. So if our intent is to see where the things stand a year from now, and if there isn't any sort of indication that the rail is forthcoming to push to have it as a recreational trail or whatever, we need to give that message to the Island Corridor Foundation, and we need to influence them to amend the mandate. And even if it's along the lines of, I mean, one of the arguments that I've heard over the years, which has always appealed to me, is that if it turns into a recreational trail and at some point in the distant future, somebody decides that they are willing to put up the money for rail, then the corridor is in fact still there. I don't know what sort of, I don't remember the reports, what they've said about the extent to which the rail that's there is still viable. But I'm guessing that you'd need to replace the whole shooting works if you put in an electric train system. So So yeah, I think we need to influence the corridor the corridor foundation to consider a different mandate and send our representative back with that message. If our feeling is at the end of this year we want this to go in a different direction. Thanks.
So, Madam Chair, we have a motion on the table that we're not talking about anymore. I think the proper course of action here would be to vote on the motion on the floor, and then if there's a subsequent motion, move to that.
Director Arbor.
Thanks on the motion. I just want to clarify, have board clarification of the intent of the motion is to say that at that point, our commitment expires. Or just correct. Is it to be considered or does it expire? That's an important point of clarification, I think, for us.
Director Craig.
So my intent was that we would reconsider at that time. If there's no further action, I think we pretty much know what the vote is. But having said that, there's nothing like a deadline to get action happening. And, you know, you wait all the way right till the end and then you pull it before you actually get there. You might see a lot of action all at the end. You might not. I don't know. But I think it's worth waiting and finding out and then making our decision at that point.
Okay, so
Sorry, I thought you had your.
any further comment? Okay, so we've added when the matter will be reconsidered on April 15th of 2023. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Director McCollum.
Thanks. I'll move that the CVRD board ask a representative on the ICF to initiate the process required for revising its mandate to allow for the consideration of other potential uses of the island corridor assets.
Seconded by Director Morin. Any further comments?
Yeah, just a quick one. I just to encapsulate the conversation that we've had this evening. I think one of the main issues with how the Island Corridor Foundation issue and, you know, losing rail and envisioning what's best going forward, we've had no other options considered, and so this has been stuck. And the intention here is to ask the Island Corridor Foundation just to consider what other possibilities are. It's not advocating that all the trail or sorry, the tracks get torn up. It's just simply investing some resources into looking at what the potential are and also the repercussions of what that would be. We've heard that some of these lands could revert, but we don't really understand where. Director Hillian mentioned that we don't want to hinder, you know, commuter rail service in the capital region with our decision, but is that even, I mean, do those things play together? Are we, if we're committed to trail in our region, is that really impacting whether or not a light rail service would return to the capital region? And these are all things that ICF could spend some time looking into, but we just don't really have a very good understanding of it. And it makes it very difficult to have an informed conversation about what's best for the asset.
Thank you. Next, we go to Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just speak in support of this. I think what we've managed to do today is to avoid the habit of just kicking this down the road. I think by putting a clear sort of sunset in the first motion, that's important, or a reconsideration after we really, I think, have an idea of where things would go if nothing was in place by next April. I think this Councillor McCollum's subsequent motion points to the fact that it's very difficult to choose options when there's only one option which is being explored, and the ICF is mandated to keep itself to that single option. And I think it's hampered even our discussion today. We just don't have the numbers we need on alternatives to be able to make, we've got sort of reports of back of the envelope math and older figures. And, anyway, I think there are very few times that you would make a decision on an asset as considerable and important as this without having a more than one costed out option on the table. And only ICF can do that. And they can't do that unless they open their mandate further to consider other possibilities and present options to the stakeholders, including the CVRD. So strongly in support.
Thank you. Director Hamir.
Yeah, thanks. I'm also in strong support of this resolution, but I just wanted to ask our ICF representative if a letter, in addition to a mandate to move this forward, not knowing the culture around the ICF table, is if we instruct you to bring this forward, is that a strong enough, or does a letter also need to go to the board? So,
Dr. Harper.
A letter would be great, but the resolution is important if it does pass. I do want to, so this has been discussed over the years, and I can tell you the ICF's current view of a motion like that would be, as you heard before, there will be concerns about the reversionary rights, First Nation claims, all these different things if it's a use other than rail sit. And the way the motion, I think it's close what you're trying to get at, but I think the ICF would probably look at the exact wording of this and say, actually, we are doing that within our mission statement. So I'm trying to seek clarification of Dr. McCollum. The intent of the motion is to consider alternate uses for the rail bed, because the corridor itself is being used for active transportation, is being used for fiber optic lines, is being used for municipal crossings, is being used for rail. If you do say the rail bed, this would be there's a process to amend the mission and mandate, and this would create a lot of discussion. And I think there's a high bar to change the mission and mandate from memory. And I apologize to the public and the ICF if I get this wrong, but I think you need something like 2/3 of the board to agree, or there's some high bar criteria. So what I could do is work with our the ICF CEO to probably come back with the description of what you're asking for, to look at what the process looks like, so we have the right information, and also to table it as the regional district for consideration by the ICF board. It's a big step. It's a step that's been discussed for years, but I think, align with your first motion. I'm happy to bring it forward, and I know in the climate that we're at, you ask about the culture of the ICF. It's a proactive board that's having hard discussions right now, and so this will be one more hard discussion to inject into our collaboration between First Nations and regional districts. Thanks.
Thank you. So is that something that you want to friendly amend rail bed? Yes. Thank you. And Director Grant.
Yeah, so I just wanted to be clear what Daniel was asking for. And did that amendment, is that what you're looking for? Okay, that's fine. I thought you wanted to go back to the corridor and they could give us an explanation, but you're good with that.
Okay, I don't see any further lights. There's a motion on the floor. It's been first and seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And since we've been at it for almost 2.5 hours, I would like to take a 10-minute break. So we'll come back at 6:27. Okay, coming back from break. That lands us at item 6, which is the 2021-2025 financial plan amendment bylaw number 699. Arbor and Grant, thank you. And I will pass it over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Kevin Duval, acting CFO, is here to explain this report and what is required through the bylaw and answer any of your questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Russell. Through the chair, good evening to the directors. So yes, what is in front of you today is the 2021-2025 amended financial plan bylaw for your consideration. This is a normal part of our annual financial planning process in that it represents the formal or legal authority to revise our adopted budget bylaw for 2021-25. And it includes all of the roll-ups of the previously board-approved budget amendments that occurred throughout 2021. And of course, those were both on the operational and capital side. Normally, this is provided to you a bit earlier than now, so staff does apologize for that. Typically, we do provide this either very late in the current year or early on into the next year. And typically, it would be brought forward ahead of adoption of the 2022 financial plan. Some of the items, just to highlights that are included in the bylaw this year. Some of the amendments that were made include an update to the new Union Bay Water Service to facilitate the development of a water master plan. There were a number of grants that were also received through the year, including the Strengthening Communities Grant. And then there were also a number of various capital project updates, all of which are highlighted on the first 3 pages of the bylaw for your information. But those include capital project amendments to services such as the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service, our electoral area park service, a number of our water services, and also one for transit. Additionally, this year, however, we have also brought a recommendation for your consideration with respect to the budget for the Comox Valley Water Treatment Plant. As part of our initial findings as we started our 2021 year-end process, we realized that going back to the development of the financial plan for 2021-25, there was a budget carry forward from 2020 that was inadvertently not included in that financial plan. And so what we're hoping to do is just realign or clean up that budget. I just want to assure that there is no change to the overall budget for that project. That project budget remains at the $126 million as approved, which, as indicated in the report, is broken down to $58.5 million in senior government grants, $38.5 million in capital reserve contributions, and then, of course, $29 million in debt financing. So what we're looking to do is just bring forward those unexpended or unspent budgets from 2020 into 2021. It then aligns everything back to kind of where the project currently sits. And then what was presented to both the Water Committee and the board as part of the 22 financial plan will then also align with these amendments made here today. So that's all I really have on the staff report, but certainly more than happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Kevin. I think we're all happy to do some housekeeping there. I don't see any lights. And people's mouths are full anyway. Director Arbor.
The really fun questions, Kevin, would be, what would happen if we didn't do this?
Oh, good question. So at the end of the day, as I mentioned, the board is able to amend the adopted financial plan on an annual basis, but that does have to be done by bylaw. So as much as the normal process is these would come forward to the various committees, commissions, or to the board directly, and those obviously get approved, but we are obligated to roll that up into an amending budget bylaw just to formalize the process.
Thank you. And seeing no further lights, we're on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried. And there's a recommendation. I think that was Grant and Arbor. Thank you. Any further discussion on the recommendation? Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. And pardon me for speaking with my mouth full. I just want to extend gratitude to Kevin and all the finance staff, given the circumstances they've been working under and all the tremendous amount of work they've taken on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, it is a strenuous situation when you have a loss of a chief financial officer. So thanks very much, Kevin. Okay, so the recommendation's been moved and seconded. It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We're on to bylaws and resolutions for first, second, and third reading. Okay, for which bylaw? Okay, Arbor and Grant move first and second for bylaw number 699, the Comox Valley Regional District 2021-2025 Financial Plan and Capital Expenditure Program bylaw. Okay, and this is both full boards. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Hillian and Arbor move third of the bylaw. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. So we're on to final adoption for bylaw number 705, the Comox Valley Tourism Service Future Expenditure Reserve Fund Establishment bylaw. This is a vote of the areas and Courtney Comox. Again, it's for adoption. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. We're on to item 3, which is bylaw number 707, Denman and Hornby High-Speed Internet. Grant and Cole Hamilton, thank you. Again, this is for adoption and it's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. We're on to item 4.
Move for.
Second.
Grieve and Grant, and that's for bylaw number 708, Weed Control Service Future Expenditure Reserve. And this is a vote of the areas for adoption. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. We're on to item 5. This is bylaw 709 for Denman and Hornby Islands Bylaw Enforcement Service Future Expenditure Reserve.
Second.
Grant and Cole Hamilton, and it's for adoption and it's a vote of full board. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. We're on to item 6, which is bylaw number 710, Bain Sound Community Facility Support Service Future Expenditure Reserve. Grant and Arbor, thank you for adoption, and it's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. We're on to item 7, which is bylaw number 711, Saratoga Beach Community Mosquito Management.
Move 711.
Grieve and Arbor, thank you. And it's for adoption. It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. On to item 8, which is bylaw number 712, Comox Valley Regional District Local Election Bylaw. Arbor and Grant, thank you. It's a vote of full board for adoption. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. And we have new business and there is an addendum. And we need to first consider the addendum or vote on considering the addendum. It's been moved by Director Hillian, seconded by Director Arbor. All in favor of considering the addendum? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Okay, so now we will consider item 1, which is Mount Washington Fire Hall Alternative Approval Process results. Grant and Arbor, thank you. And I will pass it to staff.
Thank you very much. And Jake Martins will come forward and provide the results of the alternative approval process for your consideration.
Thank you, Russell, and through the chair. Yes, so this brief report summarizes the results of the recently concluded alternative approval process for bylaw 686, which concerns the Mount Washington Resort Community Fire Hall Loan Authorization bylaw. At the close of the process on April 11th at 4:30 p.m., there were 7 elected response forms received. Upon review, 3 of those response forms were deemed ineligible, and so there was a total of 4 valid responses received, which is less than 1% of the estimate electors within the service area. So with that result, elector approval has been received, and so now the board now may consider adoption of bylaw 686 for the loan authorization bylaw, as well as the amendment to the service establishment bylaw, which was introduced to increase the maximum requisition for the service in anticipation of the increased costs associated with the debt servicing. With that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Director Morin.
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm just curious whether the folks who are disqualified receive any information about that. Thanks.
Yeah, through the chair. So in this case, we followed up individually with each of those individuals. And in this instance, they were not eligible due to their ownership of property was not within the service area.
Thank you. And Director Graef.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yeah, I would just take this opportunity to thank staff so very, very much in working with the steering group up at Mount Washington steadfastly over the past 6 or 7 years, but this has been going on, of course, for over 20 years. As you probably know, we've had some very near misses, very close near misses up in fires up at Mount Washington over the years, and lost a lot of property. But even more so, we've been very fortunate in that we have not, touch wood, yet lost any lives. So I know it's a small service area. Fire departments cost a lot of money. It's my hope that by establishing the fire department up there, we can bring some relief around insurance and for the homeowners up there. It came very close, as you know. Only 10 voted. If 10 people voted against it, we would have lost it. But I think it's also an opportunity to see maybe some growth on Mount Washington in forms of tourist services and things that I know hotels aren't interested in coming to Alpine Resort Community unless there is a fire department. So maybe we can see a little upgrading of the facilities on Mount Washington as we go forward. And I do think that given time that the residents will come to realize that this is a very essential service. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Director Hermier for contributing as well with her gas tax funds to help get this thing going. It brought up our contribution to $800,000, which lightened the load quite a bit for the property owners up there. So thank you, Director Hermier.
Thank you, Director. Director Arbour, you're next.
I think I want to extend congratulations to staff, but Director Grieve as well. He's been a steady champion for this project and trying to move it up at every opportunity. And I think it's not 10 electors, it's 54 that would have been defeating it based on this. So you actually did really well with just having, I guess, 4 register their concerns. But again, it was great to watch your passion for the topic. And I know when the couple of times there were fires in the term, you came back the next day at the ESC or the next week and pounded the table to say we need to get that fire all up there. And it seems like the community fully agrees with you. So congratulations. Look forward to the start of the bill if the bylaws get passed today around the loan authorization. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Director Morin.
Sorry to speak a bit again, but I just wanted to say I'm happy to see this going forward. I know I'd mentioned before, excuse me, that I was up on the mountain, which I drove in practically a blizzard to get up there, and immediately upon getting into my warm room, the fire alarm was pulled. And this was about 1 a.m, and everybody was outside freezing, including my grandson. Well, I was keeping him warm, but anyway, it really resonated with me on that evening that it would have been dicey getting people up there to help if that had not been a false alarm. So I appreciate it going forward, and particularly because we're also using Mount Washington. Mount Washington's used all year round, so it's not just a seasonal thing. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any further lights. We're on receipt. It's a full board, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. So there's
685. Second.
Grieve and Grant have moved bylaw 685, the Mount Washington Resort Community Fire Protection Service Establishment bylaw. It's a vote of the full board. Oh, this is for adoption. Vote of full board, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried.
Move 686 for adoption. Second.
Grieve and Grant moving bylaw 686, the Mount Washington Resort Community Fire Protection Service Loan Authorization bylaw, also for adoption. Vote of the full board, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And that will take us to our in-camera report.